Am I on? I don't think I'm on yet. Thanks. Thank you, Jesse. And thank you all for being here for this morning's session. I'm delighted to be here to tell you a little bit about the Gateways Music Festival and the experiences of a few classical musicians of African descent. I first became involved with Gateways back in 1997 when I was then Director of Community Relations for the Chicago Symphony. And at that time, we invited 4 Gateways musicians to Chicago for a 3-week residency. And during that time period, they performed for a combined audience of several thousand at community centers and libraries and detention centers, houses of worship all over Chicago. And this culminated in a final standing room only performance at the DeSable Museum of History and Art, African History and Art. The performances were extraordinary, the audiences were amazing, but we were most shocked by and most impressed by the number of people who came up after the performances and said to the musicians, "We've never seen black people play classical music before." Hundreds and hundreds of people throughout Chicago said that. And those who were parents said, "How can we find a place for our child to learn how to play a musical instrument?" It was then that I recognized the power of the Gateways Music Festival, its power to transform lives, its power to change people's beliefs about what was possible for them. And now when someone asks me to describe Gateways, and it's difficult to describe Gateways, you really need to see it and to hear it to believe it. But when they ask me now, I say, well, and I'm half serious, half joking, but I say that we aspire to be the Venus and Serena Williams of classical music, right? We want every black child, actually every child of any race, any ethnicity, to see and hear a Gateways ensemble or the Gateways Orchestra and say, that's what I want to do. I can do that. I want to be that. Gateways is probably the most extraordinary festival you've never heard of. And that's actually not by accident. As it turns out, fame and fortune and accolades and all of that kind of stuff really weren't the focus of our founder, Arminta Adams Hummings. For Arminta, it was about the community, it was about the musicians, it was about the music and artistic excellence. An extraordinary pianist in her own right, an Eastman faculty member, named one of the Juilliard 100 when that school celebrated its 100th anniversary. Arminta rarely, if ever, performed during the festival. She would say, the purpose and the mission of Gateways is not about me. It's about the music. It's about the musicians. I don't want it to be about me. Having grown up and starting her career at a time when there were very, very few places for a classical musician of African descent to make a living, Arminta is from the generation of black classical musicians that were raised up within the black community. And in large cities like Chicago, New York, Detroit probably, Washington, D.C., black classical music associations and societies and concert series and chamber music groups and orchestras thrived. And they gave us the likes of people like Francis Walker and George Walker, Sylvia Olden Lee, Marian Anderson, Leontine Price. These are people who came from within the black community during that time period. In 1993, 24 years ago, Arminta created Gateways. She started Gateways so that her son, the extraordinary violist Amadi Azikiwe, and his generation of black classical musicians would feel the sense of community that undergirded and supported that previous community. That mother's love, her love of the community, her love of the music is what led to Gateways. Anybody who knows Arminta, there are a lot of ways to describe her, but one is that she is a force of nature. She climbed, for instance, Mount Kilimanjaro at age 76, just a few years ago. And she would say that in creating Gateways, she was just carrying out God's orders. I say all of that to describe what Gateways is and what it may perhaps always be. A classical music organization that is firmly rooted within the Black community and that upholds the ideals of artistry, collaboration, determination, and community ownership. Those are the important ideals for Gateways. Many people who are just learning about Gateways think that it's a one-man shop, namely me. Nothing could be further from the truth. The real power of Gateways is in this extraordinary, dedicated army of more than 50 volunteers who manage and make Gateways happen. They manage the logistics for travel and lodging for the musicians, marketing and communications, the website, fundraising, special events, everything. Additionally, for programming and artistic programming and management, there is a 15-member artistic programs committee that oversees all of our work. In fact, Alex, Kelly, Ken, and one other person here sits, and Michael Morgan in the back there, sit on that committee. This past summer, we had 250 applicants for our 120 spots. And our database of nearly 700 grows every single week. Gateways musicians come from all over. The majority are from here in the United States, but a growing number are coming from Europe. This year we have musicians from Berlin and Dusseldorf and London. We have musicians from Toronto and Bogota and the Dominican Republic and Brazil coming to Gateways. The 6-day festival features more than 50 performances in concert halls and throughout the community of Rochester. And we perform for a combined audience of almost 7,500. This is an extraordinary time of growth and change for Gateways. We're excited about the future, and we are grateful for your support. Jesse, we're grateful for your support. We're grateful for the support of the League of American Orchestras. Thank you very much. And I'm talking really fast because I really want to get the panelists up here and really get us into the meat of today's session. We've left some flyers in the back. I hope that you will take a flyer. I hope that you will consider joining us this summer for all or some of the festival. The dates are August 8th through the 13th, and learn more about the most extraordinary festival that you want to know more about. Thanks. Yep. And I actually meant to show more slides, so I'm going to do that as they're coming up. I got so carried away. Okay. Jesse, you want to sit on this end? Or?
Are you staying?
Yeah, I am.
Oh,
yes. Oh, okay.
Do you want to sit next to me?
I sit anywhere.
Oh, here, let me move. Sorry. Musical chairs.
Yes. That's right. Okay. So,
Not on? On. Okay. I'd like to begin this panel conversation, and then we're going to take some questions from the audience. But Ann, I want to begin with you because you have an incredible story and legacy, and have, really been what's the word? You can't hear? Pioneer, yes. Thank you. There you go. A pioneer. So how did you do this? And, what are some of the things that, supported you and made it possible for you to prevail in, in an environment that was not all that welcoming?
How I did this, I found the harp. I could say I found the harp, or I could say the harp found me. I had piano background. My mother was a concert pianist, and
it's not picking up. I think you might have to
sit closer. How's that? My mother was a concert pianist, and when I got to high school, I wanted to take a different instrument, and discovered the harp through a music teacher at school. Because of the piano background, I think I made progress pretty quickly, and therefore was encouraged by the teacher at school, who was a Board of Ed person that was brought in to teach harp, was encouraged to continue. And I did, and when I graduated, I went to the Philadelphia Musical Academy first, and then just continued. I loved the instrument, and I continued to practice and continued to make progress. I had some very fortunate for me occurrences, unfortunate for someone else. I joined the National Symphony Orchestra in '66 as a result of the harpist had an injury to her hand. When she was gardening, she severely injured her hand, and they needed someone. This was late August, and I had been at the Marlborough Music Festival with Rudolph Serkin and others, Harold Wright, and so they needed someone quickly. They called my teacher, Alice Shalafood, to recommend someone, and called Rudolph Serkin and Harold Wright. They all recommended me. So I went right into that job, supposedly for a year, but they liked me and they asked me to stay. So I ended up being there for 3 years until I auditioned for Boston and won that job. And that actually was the only audition I ever took, which is extremely fortunate. Because when I got that job, I stayed. Was that enough?
Well, that's true. I'm curious, though. I mean, did you encounter any adversity along the way, or was this how would you characterize the path?
Oh, there definitely was adversity. From Washington, we used to tour down south a lot. There was, being in Washington, there was really no reason to go north, where Philadelphia Orchestra, New York Phil, Boston was. So we used to tour down south. And there were times when even some of the hotels did not want me to stay there. And credit to the orchestra, they said that I had to stay, and they bent the rules so that I did stay. Sometimes on the bus tours, we'd arrive at Little Rock, Arkansas, or somewhere in the outskirts of Alabama, and find restaurants to eat, and there'd be signs that said whites only. I mean, all these are things that a lot of people grew to expect, but I hadn't experienced that. And rather than fight that, I had some friends that we just said, well, let's go somewhere else. So we would find somewhere else to eat, rather than to challenge that when we were only there for passing through. I also had some experiences with some of my colleagues that were not very pleasant, and I learned to handle that. I learned to challenge someone. This was actually in Boston. Actually said the N-word to me in front of a group of women that he was showing off for. And of course that is the only time that ever happened. But I didn't want to create a scene there. But the next day, when I saw him, I said, I'd like to speak to you. And I said, don't you ever use that word in front of me again. And his response was, well, Richard Pryor uses it all the time. I was just kidding, Richard Pryor. And I said, well, don't you ever use that around me. And he definitely apologized and said, he would not. And to his credit, he did not. That is the only time I experienced that degree, which I think is kind of like the ultimate degree of racism, to be called names like that.
I'm curious from anyone else on the panel. We're a long way from institutionalized segregation, but I'm curious if anything that Ann has talked about. How does that relate to your own experiences today? Are we past all of these things, or what's your experience? Kelly, you're shaking your head.
There's so many ways that we've moved forward, and there are ways that we've also moved backward, and I don't know. What comes to mind in some limited cases is the soft racism of low expectations. There's also the hard racism of very specific things. Like I became sub with a major orchestra because I was runner-up at the audition, and one of my first few days there, it was an innocent joke, but kind of revealing. I happened to pass by a male dressing room, and somebody was knocking on the door, and they said, "Is Donald White there?" And somebody responded, said, no, he turned black and they kicked him out. Ha ha ha. And they all had a good laugh over it. And here's 22-year-old me, like, just playing with this orchestra for the first time, you know, trying to find my way. But I think the thing that comes to mind is the numerous auditions that I did. When I was pursuing a career in orchestra, which I'm no longer doing, I'm a soloist in front of orchestras now. But when I was, I did I won't say which orchestra, but it was a major orchestra audition that I did end up winning. Behind a screen, 100%. And there's actually many aspects to that story that I could share. But one of them is, I recall, you know, when you're in a big group of people, the biggest group of people at the audition that are going to get whittled down as the process goes on, human nature, I guess, is such that the proctor or the personnel manager kind of inherently makes eye contact with the people that they kind of think are going to be the real players in the situation. I know after doing many auditions, I noticed that happened. And in that particular audition, which was an orchestra I had never played for before, I had no history, I didn't know anyone, it was a total new situation, I noticed that the personnel manager just never made eye contact with me. In that beginning, when he was saying, these will be your times, this will be your practice room, and he made eye contact, very pointed eye contact with certain people. And then the next round came along, and it was smaller, and there I was. You know, he still didn't make eye contact with me. He was like, here'll be your rooms, here's your practice room. And then the third round came along, and it was like just three of us. Then suddenly he was like he was looking at me. You know, so it's like the soft racism of low expectations. And then I won the audition. Actually, the full story is that I was not given the job. It was an audition in 3 rounds behind a screen, 100%. And I was told that the music director loved my playing, but that he had 30 days to decide whether or not to hire me. And 6 weeks later, I was told that the music director was not interested in hiring me. I don't know what the reason is. All I know is that the process broke down. The process. You know, so there are 2 aspects of that. Both of them stand out in my mind as obstacles to overcome in the field. I'll give the floor to someone else.
Alex, Judy, Michael?
I'll go a little. Sadly, conductors cannot audition behind a screen. My entire career would be completely different if that were true. I actually, I find the whole notion of dealing with race is that you cannot tell why you're being advanced, and you cannot tell why you're being held back either. And so I'm constantly trying to get students in the process, students of color or conductors of color, to move past that and not let people stop them, because you will never know what the actual reason was that they didn't take you. I will say one of the things that helped me was I did a lot of stuff very early on in and around Vienna, and this was the Vienna of the 1980s, where a lot of the World War II generation was still around, and they were still running things there. And if you advance, I won a competition there, but part of the reason I won was because they didn't let the jury see their comparative results. They did it all by computer, and they didn't even tell, the jury was unaware of who was advancing during the various rounds. They just did it numerically.
Yeah, same as what I was.
Right, and so you kept moving forward, and then at the end, there I was on the top, and everyone's like, how'd that happen?
Yeah.
And then the other thing is then with the Viennese orchestras at that time, it's like American orchestras now, occasionally, not very often, but they think they're giving you a hard time. They know nothing of giving a conductor a hard time. Those people, they wrote the book on giving a conductor a hard time. So now I go to places and people say, oh, well, I hope the orchestra wasn't too difficult. And I was like, I didn't even notice they were being. So I always thought that was great to get it out of the way at the very beginning, and then nothing surprises you the rest of the way. I think that's true of a lot of people up on this panel now. Nothing surprises us anymore.
Okay, yeah. So for me, the only thing that really kind of comes to mind is that I I won my job. Actually, I won it very young. It was my first audition, actually, but I've taken several more since. Somebody was actually playing the job, and they really enjoyed her playing, and it was presumed that she would win the job. So then when it came down to it, and I won, I was a little nervous, actually, going into that situation. Because like you said, wasn't really sure why they picked me over her, because they were actually happy with her. And I do remember my first rehearsal. This is a nice story, by the way. I remember my first rehearsal. I play second flute, and I had to play the Moldau, which begins actually as a second flute solo. And so I feel like because of that, people were very early on able to hear me play and to say, okay, she is good. She did deserve to win this job, as opposed to people always wondering, I wonder why she won this job. So I kind of feel lucky in that way, that it was very clear and very early that people really did enjoy my playing. So
I just want to say that that's one of the examples of the things that we have to deal with. Why do we have to wonder why do people have to wonder why we get hired when we get hired, even when they do love our playing? Why do we have to wonder? There's an inherent racism in that. When people assume that there's some other reason, that sure, the world is full of, the world requires that we represent diversity, but only through the vehicle of excellence. That's my view of it. You don't handpick people that don't belong in a position but when the diversity can be supported, and you can also advance the cause of, when excellence can be supported and you can also advance the cause of diversity, I think that's great. But the fact that Judy has to wonder, or might have had to wonder, or any of us, what people thought about them, I don't know, that's one of the insidious kind of constant aspects of that. Or when you're hired for a series and you think that it's just for your playing, and somebody says, okay, but so next year for the Black concert, we were thinking about, and you're like,
I'm not even sure what the question is at this point, but I know the topic well. I think that there are certainly challenges. There are challenges that come from being the only anything, right? So just being isolated, that can be challenging regardless of how that is sliced. I think it's also challenging because I can't speak for everyone, but I know that I feel poignantly the separation that orchestras have from their communities, because it's a community that I identify with. And it's challenging to not be able to move the needle in terms of making that an institutional priority. And I recognize that I'm coming from a personal place with this, but that's the fact of the matter. And I do think that has to do with when I come out to play, and we've all played this game, it's a game Jen Arnold has taught us that we all play it. It's find the black person, right? So you come out to play a Friday night concert, and you're sitting down and you're warming up, and oh, hey, all right, check. All right, now I can, go back to my skills. I don't think that's a game that the rest of my colleagues are playing. I don't think that they're aware of that. And that's not out of any sort of malice. It's about that they're just not aware. It's not on their radar. They're not thinking about it. And I don't think they feel a sense of separation from community in the same way or with the same poignancy as a default setting. That doesn't mean that change can't happen or people don't have very unique life experiences that change, that have their default setting set up with mine. But.
So, one of the things that struck me when I went to the Gateways Festival and subsequently talked to a number of musicians from the festival was that the extent to which the being part of Gateways is a tremendous form of support for dealing with the experiences that you deal with as African Americans in a predominantly white institution. And I would just love to hear from any of you about how that works. What is it about Gateways that really contributes.
I got this. All right. Here's the thing about gateways is that, and I've said this from the beginning, I say this all the time, it's like a big family reunion with instruments. And so every Gateways festival, and the thing you need to see about Gateways, yes, come to the concert. If you can get to a rehearsal, that's what you need to see. Because the level of, first of all, support amongst everybody on the stage, the fact that at the end of the week, usually a really good orchestra concert results at the end of a week, during which we have had so much fun and we have laughed so much, and we all wonder, how can we get this feeling to our regular orchestras the rest of the year? It's really quite amazing. I know for me as conductor also, I stand in front of the Gateways Orchestra, and a rare feeling for a conductor is that you are standing in front of the orchestra because everyone wants you to be there. That is honestly, it is such a rare feeling for a conductor, because usually you've been hired by somebody, the orchestra is barely tolerating you, or they don't know who you are. They couldn't pick. I mean, if they hit you with their car in the street, they wouldn't even know who it was, and would probably be happy they did so. So anyway, but Gateways is this enormous feeling of family the entire time, and we all have had to put up with enormous amounts of crap along the way, and we all know that, and we don't have to. We don't talk about that when we're all together. We just everyone understands what we've all been through, and so we have this great week of music making. There's nothing else like it.
I do always feel like I want to preface this kind of discussion by saying I didn't get into the field to be a black violinist. I got in the field because I'm a violinist. I inherently felt that. I went to school with mostly white kids. They didn't know what I was talking about half the time when I was talking about classical music, until I started to get into more and more selective musical communities of art schools and conservatories and that sort of thing. But in my broader community, I was the only one who played the violin. And I happened to be black. I never identified that way. I didn't feel like I needed to see people who looked like me just to feel that I belonged. This music belongs to me. I know that. I don't have any question about that. And when we got to our arts class, to theory and music history and all that stuff, and chamber music, which I had the great fortune of having in high school, I had perfect pitch, and my other white colleagues didn't, and they didn't understand why dictation was so easy for me. Genetics selected me for that, and so I never felt like I didn't belong to them. They felt like they didn't, fit into what I was able to bring to, my musical life. I did, however, I had two professional parents. My mom is a retired engineer at IBM, and her first career was as a psychologist, and my stepdad was a dentist, and they enjoyed a professional community of African Americans. And I just noted to myself, that's somewhat sadly, I was like, that's just something I'm not going to have because of my chosen field. So what Gateways does for me is, I can have a professional community of African American professionals. Wow, isn't that cool? But I've never felt like I needed to see someone, my role models were Itzhak Perlman and Isaac Stern and Yo-Yo Ma and Wynton Marsalis, and, but I didn't necessarily feel like I needed those people just to exist. Which I think may be different from some kids. I'm happy to be a role model to other kids, but I didn't really feel like I needed that so much. But Gateways is amazing. And I also like to say to this discussion is that I like to play with Michael Morgan because he's an amazing conductor, period. I like to play with all of the people up here because they're amazing artists, period. And some of my greatest colleagues in the field happen to look like me, but I thoroughly enjoy playing with them and would do so under any circumstances.
I think so. Ditto for all of the joy and happiness. It's a ball. I think one line of inquiry that playing at Gateway sort of gave rise for me was, I remember sitting on stage and looking around. You're working, you're doing stuff, right? It's like music is hard. It doesn't matter who Beethoven's hard, period, right? So it doesn't matter what's going on. I'm like working on, but you know, you look up and you think, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. It's just visually, I've never, like this is so bizarre. I've never seen this. And so here's the thing. Here's the thought that it did give rise to for me, which is, you know, you have this euphoria and this excitement and the music making it did give rise to me of like what have I taken to be normative, right? Such that this is so extraordinary for me. I don't think that my colleagues come to work every day and feel the way that I feel in Rochester, though the orchestra looks like them, right? They see it reflected all around them. I think because that is normal. That is so normal that it disappears. And it had disappeared in some regards for me, though moments and feeling of isolation, moments of feeling, those moments of the is Donald White here, those moments will bring it back in a second, right? Or you'll be walking into work, I'm not thinking about being black, I'm thinking about like my kid or toothpaste or whatever. And someone will say something to me in a way that lets me know that that is how they see me, right? They'll adopt, and it's not a malicious thing. It may be actually an attempt to connect, but they will adopt some patois or something, and it'll be oh, okay, like that's like after 10 years, wow, that's still and that's how the brain works, and there's all kinds of reasons and blah, 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 blah. But bringing it back to Gateways, it did, I distinctly remember in the reflection in the airport, thinking, oh, what have I come to think of as normal, because this was so extraordinary for me, and what are the implications of that? And I don't have any answers. It's a continuing inquiry, but you know, this art form and this process is about inquiry, and that's one of the lines of inquiry that Gateways has given rise to for me.
Ann, I'm wondering, you're listening to a number of artists who are a generation or two after you, and as you listen to this conversation,
3 or 4.
3 or 4. What does this sound like to you? I mean, did you have conversations like this, you know, when you were coming up through the ranks?
Not at all. There was no one to have conversations
Yeah,
with. I mean, I had some strange experiences. My first day in Boston, I arrived at the hall, the new player, the new kid on the block, and I was tuning my harp, and a member of the orchestra came up to me and didn't say, hello, my name is, welcome to the orchestra, but he came up to me and he said, you must fry some mean chicken. Oh, gosh. And I was stunned. I said, excuse me? And he said it again. And I mean, I just couldn't believe it. I think I asked him, and he said it a third time. And I mean, I was trying to think, how can I answer this man? What do you say? And finally I said, as a matter of fact, I do. At which point he looked at me. After that, I mean, he was always trying to communicate with me, always. But every time he tried to communicate with me, it was something about race. Yeah. I used to play for Porgy and Bess, and you know this is true. I couldn't make this up. You know? The black players had to go in the back door. I said, "Oh, really?" I mean, things like that every single time. So you know, when he saw me, he saw a black face. He didn't see me as a harpist. And there were many instances like that, and that's why I said yesterday that you know, I had to learn how to handle those kind of things without getting angry, because then you lose some of the beauty of making music. And that's why an organization like Gateways, like the Ritz Chamber Players, I mean, I played with Gateways back in 1995. Lee tells me. And I played with the Ritz Chamber Players which is also an African-American chamber music group. And that's why it was so special for me, because I didn't even think about those or worry about those kind of things. It was, as I believe Michael said, it's like a big family. And being able to make music with musicians of this caliber in your family is very heartwarming.
Actually, I had one of those experiences too. My first week with the orchestra that I did go on to play with for 13 years, I think it was my first week. It was a rotation. Oh no, maybe not the first week actually, because I remember where I sat. Anyway, it was a rotational system for the first violin section, and the older gentleman who came to sit next to me said, because it was the last stand, and he was sitting with me, but he still managed to say, "Well, guess you haven't gotten that far. You're still at the back of the bus." And however many generations we are removed, this was still my experience in an orchestra.
In the north.
In New Jersey. No, yeah, not in the Deep South, no.
So just one more question before we take audience questions. This is kind of the $64,000 question. This is a room full of people in orchestras, and I think it's safe to say these are people who are committed to organizing and leading their orchestras in ways that are inclusive, supportive, that are diverse. And from your experience that you've had at Gateways and the things that you've drawn out of that experience, is there anything that you want to share with this audience that you think would be helpful as they go about their work in trying to make their workplaces more diverse and more inclusive?
So you've used the word. So one thing would be actually putting efforts into making our workplaces inclusive, that takes effort and work. There's a number of reasons why I think our workplaces aren't inclusive. That has to do with design. So part of it is the fact that we see all musicians as sort of cogs in a machine. We see the work as being limited only to what happens within sort of the field of play. There are some real benefits to that. I think that we all enjoy the idea of, I'm measured behind a screen for the most part, though not all the way a lot of the time, and there's some discussions to be had about that. But we don't, so it's about culture. It's also just about simple things like policies. We don't have, we don't anticipate conflict. We don't help musicians. We don't have any sort of, we expect that you are a sort of a grown-up and you're responsible, but there's all kinds of problems between musicians all the time, and our institutions don't offer a tremendous amount of support about how to navigate that. I think more broadly speaking, we've talked a lot about joy, and I think that one thing that Gateways can teach the field is the importance of culture and esprit de corps and what that can do for the art. Right? How we can make better music if there is more of an esprit de corps and a sense of shared purpose. Now, Gateways gets that shared purpose from all the things that we're talking about, but the question would be where does your orchestra get its shared purpose from? And how might a greater sense of shared purpose and cultivating a shared purpose and cultivating a sense of joy and esprit de corps, how might that help you make better art? And I think we see the importance of better art as that it makes everything better, right? It allows us to connect to our community more, it connects to our audience more, and on and on and on from there.
I always want to hit my head against the wall when I hear the industry talk about, we need to sell tickets, we need to grow audiences, and we need to be more diverse. We need to sell tickets. We need what can we do to sell more? And we need more diversity. And what can we do? I just don't know what we can do. We're losing classical music, and we need more. It's like, excuse me, but I think those two things go quite well together. I'm the founder of an organization called Music Kitchen Food for the Soul, which brings top-level artists into homeless shelters. And I've been playing, I bring in Maniacs and Glenn Dictorow and lots of emerging artists, and I present the concerts and I play most of them. And every time I have to do that, it's a brand new audience because homelessness is such a fluid category. People move in and out of it. You don't get the opportunity to develop the audience. And every time I do it, I've done almost 100 concerts. And I say, this is the time it's not going to work. But it doesn't ever not work. It works every time, no matter what repertoire I play, whether people grew up with music or whether... Now, I don't have the burden of ticket sales in that environment, but I do have the burden of pleasing the audience with content, programming content. And I've discovered that over 13 years, the way that I present it, people love that. So to me, that seems like there are some clues about how, and it's an extremely diverse group of people, from immigrants to, racially diverse and non-English speakers, you name it. It gives me clues about where the industry could go. to tag on to what Ann had said about how people sometimes try to have the conversation about African Americans, and somehow they think they have to talk about Porgy and Bess and things like that. Similarly, I notice sometimes around orchestras that I've been involved in, when I've been on the inside of board meetings and planning committees and that sort of thing, there can be sometimes an oversimplification of what African American taste necessarily must be. We have to program this way in order to bring in. It's like I fell in love with Beethoven. Everybody could. Everything doesn't have to be about gospel music, and similarly, my colleagues in the orchestra that I was in, when they did do gospel concerts, they would all look at me for some reason. They all, she must really be happy now because we're doing. She must not really be able to identify with that classical stuff, but now that we're doing gospel, she must. So they would all. I would look up and they're all looking at me. Why is that? So I think just a way we approach programming and broaden the discussion, African American artistic tastes are as broad as this country. And it's the way you present the music, it's how you play it. It's not necessarily just what you play.
Can I say something to that as well? I can use this one, I think. So what orchestras can do, I think that working on learning how to be comfortable in communities that are different than our own, right? So going out into the community and being there and being present is something that orchestras can do. When I was at the Chicago Symphony, we did lots of programs in the community through the Community Engagement Initiative. And everybody knows Henry Fogel for lots of things, but you may not know that he is probably the most authentic community engagement ambassador on the planet. He believes that everybody in the world every morning should wake up singing Mozart or Beethoven. And he believes it's possible, right? He does. I mean, he really does. It's extraordinary. And so the things he does because of that incredible belief system are amazing. We do programs in the community, maybe at Christ Universal Temple, which is a 15,000 member back in those days church, and they'd have a reception afterwards. Henry would be there. It'd be 10:30 at night, still lollygagging, talking to everybody this is all African American church, talking to everybody, and it's 11 o'clock at night, and Henry's still there, and I'm thinking, I got to go home, Henry. I'm exhausted, but he's still there. Right? And so it's not his community, it's another community, and he was committed to learning about that community and being a part of that community. And I would like to see that more from all orchestras. So,
Great, thank you. Judy, did you want to weigh in here?
I do think that is the important thing is the commitment. It's all well nice and good to say we want to have more diverse audiences, and just say, well, they're not coming, we can't be diverse. It sometimes kind of feels like that. Yeah. So if you just kind of go and talk to people and just see what they like, and generally you'll probably find that they generally like kind of the same things you do, or they're not so different as what you think. And then people can kind of come together in that way, as opposed to kind of assuming, like you say, oh, we have to do gospel concerts for Black people. We have to do mariachi concerts for Latino people. That sort of thing. Just kind of do concerts, and or kind of do the opposite too. On your regular subscription concerts, you can do music by Latinos, music by Black people. It kind of goes both ways in that way. So.
Great. Alex.
Yeah.
that's right.
So just in case, because I talked about joy, and joy is important, but if that makes you uncomfortable or feels too squishy, here's how you can think about it. You can think about what is the culture of your organization, where did it come from, how intentional are you about shaping it, in terms of breaking it down. So the words that come to mind for that is inclusivity, but just think about the culture of your organization. How often, who's the chief culture officer for your orchestra? Who's responsible for the culture of your organization? And then in terms of sort of breaking it down to what's a practical or a policy thing to do, there's all kinds of training and inquiries available around unconscious bias in order to help reveal to all members of your organization some of the baggage that they're carrying that's getting in the way of better relationships within the organization, and if you get your stuff together internally, then you could maybe go out externally and see some different results.
And if your conductor is not on board with this notion of connecting with all parts of your community, fire him or her.
Or executive director.
Well, conductor's actually more important because we're in America. We like the person that's standing in the front of the orchestra. I mean, any executive director, the business person, they simply don't respond to the same way. They want the actual artist who stands in front of the orchestra to also be a person and come out and be a part of the community. And there are conductors who do that more and more now. There's more and more people who are actually quite good at that. But if the conductor is not good at that, you know, he or she did not hire themselves. So get rid of them and get someone who will do it.